When I say the word heritage, what do you think of? I have a bunch of things that hit me, but I'm wondering about you. What is it about heritage that we want to protect so much? Why do we want to protect it so much? I'm going to be treading down that road and discovering what heritage means to me, why it's such an important thing to me, and you might relate to that as well. Something to think about on the next episode of Chattin It Up with CJ. Well, thanks for staying. I know you have a choice. But if you're curious about what I'm going to discuss, it's kind of a different subject matter other than caregiving. It's because it's a chance for me to give back what my parents had given me. This episode is going to discuss my family heritage. Did you ever think about the family heritage? My family heritage started in a chain of islands in the land of Indonesia. It's Southeast Asia, and my parents were born and raised there, but they got caught up as young kids. I think my mom, she was under the age of 10. My dad was just turning 10 when World War II had started. That's pretty young to be caught in a major conflict in the world. Not only that, how they survived and what they did and how the families all survived. It is absolutely crazy to even think, but it can happen at any time. You know, I was blessed to be born here in the United States as a firstborn American. But with that being said, we have been blessed enough not to have conflicts like that on this soil. I hope it never happens. But to be raised as a preteen in a war zone where people are being murdered and people are being shipped off and families are being separated. I can't even fathom that. And how people would literally lose everything that they've ever known, everything that they've ever owned. The husbands, the uncles would all be separated from the wives, and the children would be then separated. If you were a certain age, you would end up in an internment camp. If you were of the opposite sex, if you were a woman and you had young children, you guys were basically set to fend for yourselves. A lot of times, 4 to 5 families would be in a very small home, trying to make ends meet, trying to be without their spouses. Nobody knows if they're alive. They passed. Nobody knows. Literally, for the entire time, they're all separated. And if you didn't know how to cook, I say this because it's comfort. We talk about comfort food, things that console us. There's things that they went through that we would never even begin to fathom. Things that they would forage, things that they would gather to make a meal. These are not just stories and movies that we watch. These were the accounts of real people. I sat down recently, and I have the actual book, but I listened to the audiobook narrated by the author. And I realized that her parents were the same age as my parents. Her father was born in 1932. So was my father. Her father was born in Indonesia, as my father was born in Indonesia. My mom was born in Indonesia, but not until 1937. So she was a little bit younger than my dad. I'm talking about a book called All Ships Follow Me. It was released in 2019. It's about a family's experience and a saga of both sides of World War II. In the book, Mika Erkins, she is the one that is narrating the story of her parents and her grandparents. She was born here in the United States, just like me. Parallels so much with my own family that I was able to remember things that mom and dad had brought, pictures that they had brought of when they immigrated here, post World War II, pre World War II. I got little visions of what their life was back in Indonesia before the Japanese occupation. Her father lived in Indonesia. He was there when the Japanese invaded the island He and his family and hundreds and thousands of other Dutch civilians were interned and put into concentration camps and into forced labor, hard labor camps. In fact, my uncle, who I've never met, who passed away at the age of 17, died in one of those camps. The Japanese occupation was pretty tough. He surrendered at World War II. The author's father and his family, they were set free in a country that plunged immediately into civil war. I heard stories like that from both my mom and dad because they said, we finally got to exhale. We finally got to the point where we could say, oh, the war is over. We can go back to living our life. We could try to figure out how our family can get together again. But it wasn't happening because immediately after that, the Indonesian revolution happened. They plunged immediately into a revolt. It was the Indonesian revolution. They were going to take back their country. They were going to take back the Dutch colony that it's been for hundreds and hundreds of years. They were going to take it back and say, this is our country. Anybody with Dutch blood, get out. And that's what happened. That's how my family ended up in the Netherlands. That's how this author's family ended up in the Netherlands. The tropics were the only thing that they ever knew. The hot, sweltering tropical land that they grew up in was recovering from World War II. And yet they were thrown out onto cargo ships and brought into a land that was quite different, far from the tropics. Not only that, they were discriminated against because of the color of their skin. Let's face it, Dutch Indonesian people, aka Indos, when you live out there, Indonesia's pretty close to the equator. When you're outside, you get tan. When you end up in Netherlands, where everybody's blonde hair, blue-eyed, you look different. The story of All Ships Follow Me in Dutch East Indies, and that's where my parents came from. The story here takes off with the father revisiting his homeland of Indonesia, but it also traces back to the mother's heritage. She was in war-torn Netherlands. So the stories are somewhat different in that respect. But I got to tell you, when you talk about your family history, they ended up moving to the United States. And she describes perfectly of how they were so determined to start a life brand new. Not only that, what it's like to go from Indonesia, the only home that you ever knew, to the Netherlands, and then to America, because they keep hearing about the American dream. She recounts her parents' lives during that time and just after the war, and the travels with them in this present day to the sites of their childhood in an attempt to understand their experiences. Ironically, that's what my sister and my parents did. In 1980, they took us to Indonesia so that we could be familiar with their childhood. Because let's not forget, my parents' childhood was destroyed by World War II. They left the only home that they ever knew. It was destroyed, it was taken over, and they wanted desperately to find their roots, their heritage. I started out asking, do you know what your heritage is? What is it? You know, it's property that is or may be inherited, quote unquote, an inheritance. It's valued objects and qualities, such as cultural traditions, unspoiled countryside, and historic buildings that have been passed down from previous generations. A heritage is you. It's where you started from. It's what defines you, your heritage. My heritage is in the walls of this home that I'm in. My parents came here in 1960. The home that I grew up in has long been since sold, but the value of it has carried on to another home, and it's eventually ended up in this home. This home, albeit that my parents didn't reside here, but what my parents had established as an heritage is actually this, the structure that represents their heritage to come to this country. I represent my parents' heritage. The decisions that they've made, willfully and unwillfully because of war, falls on my shoulders. It falls on the shoulders of my sister, my nieces and nephews. It's really unfortunate, but it seems like I'm the only one that really wants to focus on my side of the family. And that's okay. Maybe that's why these videos even exist. The move from Indonesia to the Netherlands to the United States spans generations, and it recounts the lives of during and just after war, and the travels that they did to present day to preserve their childhood memories, maybe just understand a little bit more about their experiences. People don't consider this. All Ships Follow Me is a book that really resonated with me because it's really a sweeping saga of the wounds of war and the trauma that can be passed down through generations. People don't think about that. There's some quirky things that I was raised with that I thought were normal. And there's things that are pointed out in this book that I never considered as to being different until I got to school and I saw in the public realm that I was different. There's things that my parents did that I realized didn't have to be done, but they did it because they came from a war baby mentality. For example, the time that my dad and I went to a Chinese buffet to go eat together, and I was like, I don't really like this dish. And my dad has always raised me, both my parents, eat all your food. There's starving children in China. And it was impounded. It was, you don't leave anything on your plate because you should be grateful for the food that you have. You should be grateful. This was all trauma because they know what it's like to starve. They know what it's like to not be with food. When I would be complaining about, I'm hungry, I'm starving, and they go, you don't even know what starving's all about. I remember my dad saying that to me all the time, but I never understood why he said that to me. He almost said it in a way of, oh, child, you have no clue. You wait. If there's ever a time when you are literally looking for something to eat, you will be desperate and eat just about anything. And I always looked at him like what? Scars, war scars that they carried as they tried to make their life as fruitful as they could here. And they did. They did it amazingly. I lost my mom in 2024. And my dad, he went on to be with Jesus in 2020. And I'm here holding the heritage, the memory of my parents. And I'm trying to salvage what they had created here in America. And the purpose of this video, many reasons: to educate, connect with other people that might understand what that's like, but also to understand that some things are worth fighting for. My parents came here with nothing. They created a life the best as they could. They afforded a lifestyle for us as a family. But ultimately, how we ended up here in America is nothing but a miracle. I'm grateful. I'm honoring them with these videos. I'm honoring them with our heritage. I'm understanding what it is to be in their shoes and how they may have been traumatized and how they saved everything. They were like pack rats. They kept everything. Why? Because at one point in their life, they knew what it was like to have everything taken away and destroyed. That they've been invaded and that everything that represented who they were and who their family was had been ripped apart. And when they were taken away from their only home that they knew, from the land that they loved, the memories of who they were, where they were, their childhood, and then being forced into a foreign country that was literally foreign to them. Out of desperation, the struggle to get to the United States because they heard about an American dream and they thought, I want to have a clean slate, a new beginning. And they did. And I'm here to carry that torch, and I can carry on that heritage. Thank you for watching. Be blessed. And always be good to yourself. I'll see you in the next video. Hey, thanks for watching. And please remember to hit the subscribe button. We are trying to grow our channel and reach 1,000 subscribers. Now, for every new subscriber, these two nutheads right here, they're going to get a treat, so we will all be happy. Thanks for watching.